Great. We're just going to let everyone trickle in. So welcome everyone who's coming in. I think I always love to, at the start of these webinars, to take a little temperature check. So yeah, I think everyone's coming in from, different days, different mornings, different places in the world. So I would love if everyone could maybe write in the chat on a scale of 1 to 10, how is your overall mood today? So one being the lowest and 10 being you're having the absolute best day so far. So we've got an 8. Oh, great. Oh, we're having a really positive group today. I'm happy everyone's some challenging days and feelings. So as always, such a range of experience. I would say I'm like a firm 7 today. I got a workout in this morning, so I'm feeling very good. Great. So as people trickle in, we're going to get started because we've only got this lunch hour. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us if you're in the Asia time zone. And welcome to Uncommon's very first webinar of the year, a very important subject on getting ahead without burning out. I am Yolanda. I'm the founder and CEO at Uncommon. We're a private network for women in leadership. And I'm so grateful to be discussing this really timely and important topic because it's really one that comes up quite often with us at Uncommon. Prior to starting Uncommon, I spent over 10 years in various commercial, operational leadership roles at really fast-growing tech companies. Like Deliveroo, Uber, and Rocket Internet, where I worked across 10 countries all over the world. So the UK, Europe, I spent 3 years in sub-Saharan Africa, and now have been based in Singapore, working across Asia Pacific for the last 7 years. It was really, founding Uncommon was really born out of my own experience as a female leader. I found it incredibly lonely and not able to necessarily find a place between home and work where I could be really open about my experience. I could find the right network and just gain the toolkit and insights to really navigate my own version of success and live a life and a career that's really meaningful. Today, I'm joined by 2 fantastic guest speakers that I'm about to introduce. So first and foremost, we have Jessica Lackey, who is a feminist strategy and operations advisor for soul-centered business leaders. She has over 15 years of experience at companies like McKinsey, Nike, and holds an MBA from Harvard Business School. Today, she combines her deep business experience with coaching insights to build sustainable business practices and teach entrepreneurs how to grow without the grind. Welcome, Jessica. It's so awesome to have you here with us today.
Super excited to be here with you.
Great, thank you. And thank you for staying up late for us today. Yeah, and secondly, we have Ivan Lee, who is a clinical therapist at the Alliance of Counselling, whose passion is and aim is to empower clients towards their social, emotional, and mental well-being. Outside of his practice, Ivan is also a professional diving instructor and outdoor enthusiast. So Ivan, you bring a wealth of experience for us today, and it's really great to have you here with us.
Thank you. Such an honor.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's get started. Firstly, just going to run through a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions, which I'm sure you will, for Jessica, Ivan, or myself, that I ask if you can put them into the chat box. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end We'll kind of tally all the questions. So please feel free to post them as we go along and as they come up. If anything from our conversation today resonates with you, please share it on social media and tag us. We're at Hey Uncommon on Instagram. So HEYUNCOMMON on Instagram, or This is Uncommon on LinkedIn. So without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, so here we are. We're talking about the burnout epidemic and why are we so burnt out? We're really going to look into this subject. It's an incredibly timely subject because, very recently, the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern made headlines with her decision to step down from her role as Prime Minister. She cited burnout as a reason for this, using the words that she just simply didn't have enough in her tank to do justice to the role. The public and honest revelation behind her decision to step down is to us a beautiful example of vulnerability in leadership and a refreshing one in an otherwise kind of steely-faced world of politics. And maybe also a little bit of a signal of changing attitudes towards, that kind of grind culture. Unfortunately, her mission burnout's not an outlier. Recent research found that over 80% of us feel overworked and burnt out. A survey from a software company found that burnout was one of the top reasons workers left their organization in 2021, many without having another job lined up. To kind of define our terms before we dig in, an official definition of burnout is a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion combined with doubts about whether your competence and the value of your work really stands. We often see burnout as this invisible thing, but chronic stress from burnout very much manifests physically, which is often the time when we realize something is wrong. So now turning over to our speakers, starting with you, Ivan. Let's start with some definitions. What are the three components of burnout that you see from your practice and your experience? Oh, you're on mute, Ivan.
Unmuted. There we go.
Yeah.
Hi,
Great.
Thanks, Yolanda. I think in practice and just by experience in encounters with friends, both professionally and socially, your definition is spot on. I mean, you brought up things like exhaustion, the fatigue and so on. There's three facets or symptomatic clusters that kind of point us toward a conclusion that a person is burned out. First one would be, as you mentioned, just feelings of energy depletion and exhaustion. Of course, there are some distinctives between tiredness and exhaustion and burnout, and I guess we'll get to that, later. But just feelings of that energy depletion. The second one would be an increase in distance from one's job. Maybe even feelings of negativism or cynicism, related to one's job. And the third area would be reduced professional efficacy, right? And efficacy, self-efficacy is just that, the ability to, or the perceived ability to impact your world, right? And so you feel like your impact or your productivity has been decreased or negatively, reduced or influenced, because of your state of exhaustion. So I think those are just the three components that we see quite a lot of.
Okay, thank you so much. To kind of dig into that point phase, we sometimes conflate burnout with feelings of stress or even exhaustion. Like, how are they different? How can we tell the difference?
I think the three things, right? Stress, exhaustion, burnout. Stress is essentially one's internal resources and energies, being called upon to accomplish something. And in that regard, we all have stress, right? You have stress going to the supermarket, deciding, which brand of macaroni to get. You have stress trying to assemble a team for a task at work that you've been asked to accomplish. just the, clearing the emails, in the day, hitting a quota, all the different things. It's just the energy that's required of you. And so you experience, stress in that way. And so in itself, stress is, it's neutral. In fact, there's a word eustress, basically stress with EU in front of it, which is good stress, stress that's healthy. Exhaustion is the temporary state of having run out of fuel, right? As Jacinda, mentioned, she doesn't have enough in her tank. And so you do come to a point where your fuel runs out and your energy is depleted. And some people refer to this as running on fumes. So that's stress, that's exhaustion. Now, burnout is a bit different. Burnout is chronic, right? Where stress and exhaustion, which ought to be, ebbing and flowing and ought to be temporary, they don't let up for extended periods of time. Or when your recovery and your restoration periods or windows are inadequate, right? Yolanda mentioned that I do scuba diving. And so in between dives, you have to rest to allow, the nitrogen out of your blood system and so on. If you just keep going and going, then it's really dangerous and it's really not good for your health, right? And so if you don't have those periodic breaks to degas, so to speak, then burnout happens, right? If you don't have any let up in your stress or the exhaustive state that you're in, then that chronic state of burnout will occur. So I think those would be just some distinctives to keep in mind, and I think we see that all the time.
That's super relatable. I think as an entrepreneur, sometimes you can have the sense that it's both a marathon and a sprint, and that learning how to find those moments of rest are the only way, and consistently are the only ways that you can be in it for the long haul as well. So I really resonate with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jessica, so would love to turn over to you. Thank you so much, Ivan. We've seen a lot of discourse around burnout, especially post-pandemic, leading experts to define the last couple of years as a burnout epidemic. Would love to hear from you. Why are we so burnt out?
I think there's a lot of reasons for it. And I think it goes back to the three reasons that Ivan talked about. For the past 3 years, there was no respite at home from work because you're dealing with, unprecedented threat to public safety. You're dealing, especially in the United States, with a complete shredding of our system of care related to teachers, related to childcare. So particularly for women, there was no respite, and the threat and stress raised even more at home. Then you have our daily routines being disrupted, which gives us all a jolt to say what's really important in our lives. And then I think the third is that cynicism and feeling disaffected at the job. Our jobs got substantially harder during the pandemic because most companies tried to replicate in-person work remotely. And that's not how we're set up to thrive. So you add more stress at home, you add a complete kind of halt in a conversation about what's really important, and work systems that are not designed for remote work. And I think that all adds up to, going from stress and exhaustion to those two, the second and third elements of cynicism and feeling less connected to your job. And I think that's where burnout pandemic happens.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. That's very clear. And do you see sort of a bounce back from that, or how has post-pandemic, kind of shaped, differed, or have we emerged more aware of burnout after?
I think you've emerged more aware of burnout after, and I think for people who have the privilege to have some choice, that's why you see a lot of the Great Resignation. I was part of that. And I think you do see the quiet quitting. You see people wanting to stay remote because I think people have woken up to it's not going to necessarily get the systemic factors at play. COVID's thankfully not as prevalent in the mindset, but the pressures aren't really going away. And so people are taking what would be somewhat systemic problems into their own individual hands where they can.
Yeah, makes so much sense. So I have a question for both of you now. Asking, I guess, a personal question. Have you ever felt burnt out in your own careers? And if so, what circumstances triggered that? Or, what are some patterns that you see in your clients who experience burnout?
Jessica, you're on a roll,
Ivan,
so
do you
why
want to
don't
go
you
first?
just keep going?
So I hit my burnout wall roughly 8 years ago at this point. I was working in a big company, and I was working, I was on call all the time at a job where I didn't need to be on call all the time. And I didn't have the support mechanisms in my life. Like, my job was my life. My whole value was my life. I was exhausted, depleted, and I started having anxiety and panic attacks, which is not necessarily burnout necessarily, but I was completely at a wall with my job because my whole identity was wrapped up in my work. And I had no identity outside of it. And when I started not necessarily being able to do what the job demanded of me, because it was a 2-person job done by 1 person, that's when my body started manifesting physical symptoms that said, you need to stop, or you're gonna check yourself before you wreck yourself, essentially.
Yeah, well, that separation between the self and work, I think that's a theme I see quite often. And seeing that, even especially amongst entrepreneurs, for instance, like, if your business fails, you're not a failure. And that can be very hard to divide. So can definitely see those themes come up quite often. Ivan, what about you?
For sure. I've always been in the people helping or people centered kind of work. I've been doing what I do for the last about 25 years. So FYI, I am ancient. But in the work that I do, I've also always held multiple or concurrent roles and responsibilities. And some of these required, 24/7 types of functioning or capacities, right? When you're working with in different communities, it's really about being present and being there at any time that you are called upon. So it's like, a medical doctor would be on call and they'll carry a pager. So the pager was essentially, strapped and lashed to you, so to speak, all the time. I would get calls from young people, hey, Ivan, you want to meet? My shift gets done earlier, so I can meet about an hour earlier. And that means 2 a.m. Because we work with, shift workers, and then it's, let's go out for some, local, supper or whatever it is. And, I love to talk about life. And so you're there and you're on hand, so 24/7 felt like 25/8 sometimes, because it was demanding more of you than you could, give, and then some. And yet, here's an insight that I was reflecting on as we we're just kind of preparing for this seminar. It's not only the negative or the unpleasant or the undesirable stuff that contributes to stress or exhaustion or burnout, isn't it? It's good stuff, good, meaningful, life fulfilling stuff that makes you come alive. It also draws upon your internal resources and energies and can deplete you. So it's not just the bad nasties that, cause you to burn out. Right? It's good stuff because it draws a lot of energy from you. Entrepreneurs face this all the time because you got into what you do, whether it's a startup or it's something that you're venturing out to create or to enhance or to enrich or to take to the next level and scale up. You do it because it makes you come alive, because you believe in it. And yet, it does deplete you of energies. And so you do need those stop gaps. The F1 race just came through Singapore a few months ago. We talk about the pit stops, right? That you do need in order to have that recharge, to, retire, not to retire from work, but to retire your cars, and to be able to keep going again. And so, I think for me, it's not simply a crossroads you get to where you are just plain flat out burned out, but just a state of burning out all the time. And in Singapore, we talk about how you burn your candles on both ends, but the candle is in the oven, right? And so it's high pressure all around, and you are burning your candle from both ends, you know? And so it really is that perpetual state that you need to be really aware of, and be really wary of not perpetuating and allowing yourself to succumb to, right? So
Yeah.
that's my
Yeah.
experience with burnout.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really. That analogy, that visual is I think gonna stick in my mind.
But the candle, yeah,
Yeah, the candle. Yeah.
I feel it just describing it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's so evocative. My last question is for Jessica. It's interesting to note that there is an intrinsic relationship between burnout and our sense of self at work. I think you talked about this. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think especially when you're given value for one thing you do, then someone else controls that destiny, right? Like your worth is judged by kind of how someone else views your performance. But we've been trained, especially women, our whole lives to get the grade, to be held to some kind of external standard, and we get praised for it. So when you associate doing well at tasks someone else gives you with being praised as kids and being rewarded and being promoted, it's so difficult to untangle that sense of identity from I'm a person worthy of love as a human versus I am a worker that's promoted for my horsepower and capacity. And, I was never taught as a young girl, really how to be myself other than to be good at school, because to go to school is to get the college to be promoted. And it took me getting into my mid-30s to be like, that was my whole life. And to realize that like, no one else was going to care about me if I didn't care about me first.
Yeah. Oh, that's so powerful. And yeah, I can see Lily, yes, it resonates with me so much as well, as like this idea of like external validation and like building and constructing a sense of self-worth from everything that comes outside of ourselves. And like, it's very hard to unlearn, and learn to give that to yourself as well. Learn to say that, even if you're not creating or producing or, meeting all these kind of professional goals, that you still have worth. And that, I think, is a very hard concept to internalize, even if you can understand it kind of cerebrally.
Yeah, I mean, it's the industrialization of our workforce means that, we're nothing unless we're hands-on keyboard working. At least that's what we're told, and that's what we're rewarded for. And so to then say, no, I'm going to set my own boundaries. I'm going to hold my physical body in a higher regard is not something, it's something that's explicitly like not rewarded in in so many companies. And so I think that's why we don't know how to detangle it.
Yeah, exactly. I think sometimes, like, even if you do take those days off, and I've observed this in myself, is you can still feel that sense of guilt. You're taking a day off, but you're still feeling bad about it. And so I think it is a kind of a journey to be comfortable doing nothing and see that actually as like value to yourself, and not feel like a sense of guilt or shame for that as well. We're going to move on to the next section of our webinar, turning over to all of our participants today. We've got this little graphic here that looks at 12 stages of burnout, and would love to do a little bit of a poll with everyone, being as honest, and just to say that none of this will leave our chat, and but just to get a sense of, which one of these stages resonates with you the most. We're at the start of a new year, start of the year of the rabbit as well. Where are you kind of starting off this year feeling? Would love if everybody could put that into the chat. Wow, thank you everyone for being so honest. Yeah, as always, such a range here. And thank you for taking the steps to join this webinar. And I think that is really promising. A 0, that's awesome. Great. Thank you everyone for being so honest. Great, thanks everyone. We're going to move on to our next part of the webinar, which looks at a subject that sometimes gets a bad rep. We're going to look at both ambition and well-being and whether they can coexist. Yeah, ambition lately has, especially when used in the context of women, sometimes it can be have a little bit of a negative connotation. The New York Times famously declared that we are in the age of anti-ambition. For a long time, we've been fed the same story. If we grind hard enough, if we hustle in those hours, we put in those hours, we're going to be successful. And I say successful with quotation marks. However, in the wake of the pandemic, and I think we have seen this really big reckoning, a collective reckoning around ambition, around redefining success, a bit of a disillusionment with the system that, that has persisting biases. This is definitely something I've seen in conversation with women at Uncommon, with my friends as well. Before we dive into some questions for our guest speakers today, I entered the workforce, in the post financial crisis era, the era of the girl boss a little bit. This idea of if you just grind hard enough, if you just out alpha all the boys, that you're going to kind of get all the fruits of your labor and you're gonna be happy and you're gonna have the best life ever. This is also the era of the unpaid internship, which I definitely don't miss at all. But as I move forward, and I think, to be honest, I played that game. I did the sleeping in the office. I did the that very hardcore version of success, and it didn't yield the version of success that mattered to me. And I think often what we see is a surefire recipe for unhappiness is trying to live your life according to somebody else's version of success. And for me, redefining ambition is really about honing into yourself and understanding for the season of your life that you're in, what is a priority for you, what is important, how do you root yourself in your values, and then make choices according to those values. For me, right now, for the season of my life that I'm in, I'm building a company that I love. Do I finish work every day at 5 p.m.? No, but I find joy in putting in work to the mission and the things I care about. But it's about finding the choices, and it is like not a one and done choice. It's like a series of micro choices that you make along the way that kind of align to what's important to you at that moment. And that's something we built with our peer coaching network at Uncommon, is to really create a space for our members to dig deep, like really find out for yourself what is on your compass, reflect on these goals and scale back or course correct if needed, and really, championing this this kind of new and an individual version of success. So now, turning over to our wonderful speakers, would love to ask both of you, in the modern zeitgeist, ambition is largely equated with work and professional success. Is there another way to define it? Jessica, let's start with you.
For me, ambition is all about what do I want more of in my life, and how do I want to grow, and how do I want to learn, and what's the vision for my life? And it used to be, I wanted the title, I wanted the salary, I wanted the responsibility. And now it's less about that. I'm still highly ambitious, but not, those aren't my markers of success anymore. It's how am I supporting other women? How am I giving back to the communities I'm a part of? How am I investing in my health, in my family, in my relationships? I'm ambitious because I want to have dinner parties once a month with my friends, not necessarily climb the title at work. But I think it's redefining ambition outside of the scope of work, which for so long was all I had. And so I've redefined it for me by broadening the scope of how I want to learn and grow in my life.
Yeah, that's really clear. Thank you so much, Jessica. Ivan, for you.
Yeah, like Jessica said. I think I understand ambition as being simply the drive to accomplish whatever you have chosen to do or to be. When I say to be, I do believe that we're created as human beings, not human doings, right? And so if you live from the inside out, from who you are and not just what you do, in that case, in that vein, I think Christian Bale's Batman probably got it wrong. It's not what you do that defines you, it's who you are that then is expressed in what you choose to do, right? And so I think if you look at ambition that way, then it really is about you taking, if not reclaiming, the reins of the power or the say or the authority, or repositioning yourself to actually determine what is it that you're gunning for and what is it that you want to accomplish. And not just with a list of tasks, almost like a shopping list, at the end of the day, I hit these things, therefore I am of value, or I have reestablished that I am worth something. It's more of who you are as a person. And if you start with personhood, and then look at what you are doing and work at home, all the different mirrors that you have, either established or that have been established for you by, society and our day and age, then you define that. All right. And so when you gun for those things, that drive is, I think, what we refer to as ambition. So hopefully that widens the scope a little bit, or widens the lens a little bit, to where you don't have to define it in a way that is restrictive or limited to what, say, the workforce or the work culture, wherever you are, from, determines for you, right? And so that's just how I've, come to understand ambition. So it's good. It's a good thing, especially if you own it in a healthy and a wholesome way.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Ivan. My last question is for Jessica. You work with a lot of entrepreneurs and C-level individuals who are obviously responsible for sustaining and growing their businesses. And also meeting targets. Those realities are incredibly real. And is burnout inevitable in high-powered jobs? How do you reconcile that level of ambition and well-being?
I don't think it's inevitable, but I think it takes, especially for C-suites in bigger companies, it takes a remarkable design of the workplace for structures that support turning off. Like it, I don't know if you're ever, as a C-suite leader in a huge organization, going to be able to turn your phone off fully at 5, but setting communication parameters about only text if it's emergency, modeling that for your teams, designing in-person / hybrid work, and then also truly being thoughtful about prioritization. And I think there are targets we have to hit, but there are also, it's a lot of dead weight in a lot of organizations related to projects that never get canceled, organizational detritus that just gums up the system. And there's a lot of, we've always done it this way, so we should always do it this way. I don't think it's inevitable, but it takes an entire cultural leadership shift from the top. It's a lot easier for solopreneurs and, smaller entrepreneurs because they sit at the seats of power to make that happen. But I'm hoping that's the case for, I see a lot of hiring freezes right now with the, especially in the States with like the tech layoffs. And that's a signal that they're just going to do the same work the same way with less people versus say, this is an opportunity to redesign how we think about work for the betterment of our employees. And there's not a lot of C-suites that are going to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica. Like, I think you really hit the nail on the head on it is structural. Like, the organization around an individual has to be conducive to that as well. And it's also sometimes about choosing organizations that can embody those values, or at least to a certain extent, care about these things. Thank you. Awesome. We're going to move ahead to our last section because I want to leave some time for some of your questions. So feel free to put those into the chat. We will be going through those. So now we love to end these webinars with a couple of clear and actual takeaways for you. So how to get ahead without burning out. I'll probably offer a couple of them and then turn over to our wonderful speakers and get some others. But a big one that I have seen through running Uncommon, but also for myself, is lean on a support system. So, sometimes we can feel incredibly lonely in navigating our careers, our lives, sometimes feeling like we have to keep a facade around people, but especially in a really hyper-competitive environment like the workplace. But something we speak a lot about in Common is about leaning in on each other, getting ahead together, being able to ask for help together, and making sure that you have that support system, that inner circle of people that you can really be honest with about how you're doing, about some of the challenges, and who can also maybe help you work through them. And so that to me has been really a game changer, and is just making sure that we're kind of surrounded by people who can help us. Then secondly, I would say, a big one that comes up is recognizing what your boundaries are and communicating them. I see this so often with women in particular, is not being able to say no, and not being intentional about what you're saying yes to as well. So a key indicator that you're on the path to burnout is feelings of resentment about your job. Recently came across a podcast about with Natalie Liu, an author of The Joy of Saying No. And according to her, one of the biggest signs of bad boundaries is you're feeling the sense of resentment. So when you see that start to creep in, start to identify places where, maybe you aren't setting boundaries, or you know that there's a boundary there, but you're not communicating them to your team or your managers. So being able to kind of find a place where you can practice that, you can feel supported in how you communicate your boundaries. And this is definitely something we work a lot with women on at Uncommon as well. But would love to turn to both of you. How do you think we can grow in our careers without burning out? Ivan, do you want to start this one?
Sure. I'd love to jump in. Just building off what you're saying.
Sorry, you cut out in the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, so am I on now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're on. Great.
Okay. You know that commercial? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay. Shows my age. That's like 25 years ago. This building off what you were saying, Yolanda, about the support system. You have to forgive me. I think in terms of movies or movie references, Vin Diesel came up with this movie a long time ago, where he's some guy who's escaping from some planet or whatever it was. Pitch black it was, and he said, to the group that was following him, there's only one speed, my speed, and then he takes off, right? There's a saying that we have in a lot of the circles I run in: if you want to go fast, then you go alone, but if you want to go far, then you go together, right? And I think it's about making that choice to go together. And as you're saying, you lean in on each other to accomplish together and to ambition together, or to envision and then gun for it together. But in terms of some of the things by way of how-tos, one would be meaning making, that you believe that there is a point to each of your experiences, and you choose a healthy, wholesome frame and make the necessary adjustments to course correct, and then move towards healthy functioning. So if there's something that's worth accomplishing, and of course you would have done your soul searching and your navel gazing and your reflecting and contemplating and all of those things to determine what really is worth your while, you count the worthwhile cost, and then you'll be willing to pay it, but you make meaning of what happens, so that nothing happens that commands you or masters you, as much as you, again, the image of taking the reins and making meaning out of perhaps even negative or unpleasant circumstances or experiences, and saying, what's the good in that, or what can I learn, or how can I grow from that or upon that. Another thought would be really to live from the inside out. If you operate out of a stable, robust, mainly internally generated sense of self, and not so much what other people determine you to be, then it gives you a stable platform upon which to build, and upon which to envision, your steps and so on. If you let your outside reflect what's already on the inside, if you're consistent in terms of your reason, your logic, this makes sense for me to do job-wise or work-wise. You align that with your instinct. This feels right, and so on. And I do know from experience, women are blessed with, what is commonly referred to as a sixth sense. You've got a gut that, doofus individuals like myself, dull individuals, or just we aspire to, but do not quite tap into as easily as a lot of my women friends. You've got a gut for what is right and what is good and so on. So if you align that with the factual stuff, the information that's around you, then living from that basis, from the inside, then into your choices and your actions, I think it's a healthy way to go. And it does stem the tide of this burnout, a tsunami that keeps, coming almost as an onslaught to you on a daily basis. And finally, just being present, you live a life that is very mindful, that is characterized by reflection and contemplation and even introspection. You find your anchors, your Polaris, your North Star. I run a company called Compass Quest, and it's the idea that you find a compass for your life quest, right? And then you choose to live by that, so that your decision-making process becomes a little simpler because you are operating out of a certain bearing that you have established for yourself. It's dynamic, it moves, but you're the one that moves it and then makes the adjustments more than the adjustments being imposed on you by what's outside of you. So this is some of my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really rich insights into the subject. Jessica, do you want to talk to us a little bit about how can we grow our careers without burning out?
I think Ivan and I both touched on it's less about what you do at work, and it's more about having a life that you want to leave work and go home to. Because I think when you do that, one, it gives you such a robust foundation for when you find out that maybe your company isn't going to support your growth. So you feel less tethered to a company. Every one of my clients who has started up their own side hustle or really had life priorities where they said, I need to be present at home, has actually gotten more potent at their jobs because they stopped doing, quickest to answer email. They stopped taking on all the housework projects that don't get you promotable. They stopped saying yes to projects that are dead end and say yes to being sponsored and, leaning into what's truly going to move the needle at the business. But, leaving business where they can at business or work at work because they have a life that they want to be present for. So I think it's building that solid foundation, being present outside of your work and having a compelling reason to do so. And then also being very thoughtful about where you give your time and energy to while you're at work. And Siri didn't like that very much. But that's I think how you guard against burnout by having a fulfilling foundation outside of work.
Great. Yeah. That makes sense. I think one thing I realized when I was doing all the interviews for Uncommon that we saw this shift of women wanting to have a dream career to wanting to have a dream life, and that shift in and of itself is, I think, really profound, and that a career is part of your life, but how do you kind of think of it holistically and grow and build and make choices accordingly?
I think it's also really important when we said get ahead, being really thoughtful and deliberate as to what getting ahead means, because I looked at VPs in my company, at a couple of companies, and I'm like, I don't want that job. I don't want that job at all. And so for me, it was redefining get ahead. Is it that job? Is it more subject matter expertise? Is it more depth? Is it mentorship within the company? And so being able to identify my enoughness marker and say, this job is going to put me outside my zone of genius. I could get it, but then I'd be miserable. So I think it's also redefining what a sufficiency looks like and enoughness looks like, to say, when is ambition at the cost of what makes me great at what I love to do? And when does it put me in a role that I'm actually not very good at? And that may mean slightly less power and prestige and much more personal fulfillment.
That's so true. That really resonates, and I think requires, again, that element of looking inwards. So that's awesome. Thank you both. That's taken us to question time now. We've got 9 minutes left. I'm just going to pull up some from the Q&A here. Great. So we have, Question from Shirley. Companies don't recognize or support burnout. So you left your company in December 2022. That takes a lot of courage. What small things can you do each day to like these kind of micro steps? What micro steps can someone like Shirley, who's already taken the huge courageous leap to say this isn't the right place for me, which I think a lot of people don't necessarily get to. But yeah, what are the small steps that Shirley can take? Ivan, you want to take this one?
Sure.
Or Jeff?
I take.
Ivan, I think your mic takes a little bit of time.
Takes a while to.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Great.
Okay. I think briefly, I take both micro and longer, pit stops. Starting with, I guess the big ones. Every 100 days or so, I go on a personal retreat, and I've kind of worked over the last 10 15 years to where that becomes a bit more viable or rhythmable, maybe just establishing a bit of a rhythm. And here in Singapore, it could be a day out, just sitting on the beach and or on the rocks by the beach and staring at the waves, or it's getting a whole backpack and disappearing onto one of our islands, and I'll just do a solo camp, for about 2 nights, and I cook my own food, I'd fly fish, I journal, I listen to music or a podcast, or just rest, and kind of regroup. And so that's the little bit of the bigger ones. Because I do a lot of adventure travel, then sometimes it's easy for me to build in a couple of days on my own, to just disengage from the race, to kind of regroup and find myself, or find a bit of a center again. A bit closer to or more frequent would be weekends. We were talking about hiking. Jessica, one of my bucket lists would be to do the through hike across the Appalachian Trail. That's my first choice, above the Continental Divide one, just because I love Appalachia. But something that's periodic I can do would be that. Daily would be my drive to work. There are times when I'll turn on the BBC to know what's going on in the world, and other times it's just silence and I'm just alone with my thoughts, to kind of gather myself. I do take my breaks and my lunchtime seriously, so I don't use that to catch up on emails, so to speak, just because when I realize I can breathe, I can engage in the clearing of the emails, or responding to certain queries or whatever it is, with a bit more potency. And that's Jessica's word, because you've had those little breathers and those breaks. So the pit stops, as it were, could be very short, small ones, 15 minutes, or an hour's lunch, or 45-minute window where you can just distance yourself from the task, perhaps put your phone down and just rest. Just a quick word to champion nature. We find that why people find themselves refreshed in nature. The human brain takes a lot of energy for us to process things that are linear on straight lines, or symmetrical. So cityscapes, even stuff that you would find on on the computer and so on, straight lines and those kinds of geometric shapes that are very even. It takes the brain a lot of energy to process that. You can, and you do every day, but it takes less energy to process and engage with lines in nature, the shape of a tree, of a rock, of a stream, of a flower, and so on. And so that's why people, when they spend time, on a walk or in nature, they come back feeling refreshed, because their brain had a break without them even knowing that they were having a break, because it was processing things a little more simply, right? It wasn't tapping into their energy resource as much. So this is a quick, shout out to nature, and what it offers to us, and so the sitting on a rock by the beach, that's something I do, quite often, weekly. My office is about a 20-minute walk to an area where I can get on a pier or a jetty or sit on the rocks, quite literally, and just space out for a while, eat a sandwich and then come back. So those are little things. And of course you could blank out to rest your mind, or you could think about something in a bit of a clearer format, instead of being in the office and then tackling things that way. But
Thank you,
just some
Ivan.
thoughts.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you so much for that. The next question, I think we'll take the one from Joyshri. Jessica, it'd be great to hear from you on this. How can we develop the habit of not feeling guilty when taking well-deserved time off?
I think it's reframing it. Rest is a non-negotiable, human right that we are denied when we are overloaded by our companies. So, when we don't take rest, who gets off the hook? It's not us. We are internalizing kind of the failures of our companies and organizations to provide us adequate support. So part of not feeling guilty is doing something pleasurable with your time and designing things that you love to do, things that captivate your attention, the things that engage your body, and remembering and reframing every time, this is how I become, this is how I mitigate burnout. This is part of, I hate to say rest is part of the job, but rest is part of the job. And I think reframing it that way, that's when our best creativity happens. That's when our best recovery happens. We think muscle growth happens in the gym. It really doesn't. It happens in the spaces between the workouts. And we have to stop putting ourselves on the hook for the lack of structural support around us and stop internalizing it, because it's not for us to internalize.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. We might run a little bit over on this one, but I'll take one last question from Priya, which maybe Ivan, myself, are happy to answer this, but how do we encourage discussion around burnout and ambition in regions like Asia, where culturally people struggle to voice their opinion on these topics? Ivan, do you want to take that one?
Can you hear me now?
We've got to get your voice working.
Right at the end of the seminar, I finally remembered to check and see if my mic is on. That's a challenging one, Priya. It's not easy when a culture does seem to have certain barriers that prevent these conversations, which is why Uncommon is so important as an organization, but also as an ethos that you build into yourself to be able to have some of these discussions. In college, stateside, we were given an assignment to break a social norm, and so I did cartwheels in the campus library. Someone else climbed into a dustbin and a little trash can, and when people walked by, he said, "Don't forget to recycle." There's something to break that the social norm, to kickstart our courage, almost to say, I didn't die from that. I wasn't arrested and locked away for voicing an opinion or for not always towing the line. That's just an aside, but the idea is maybe it's for those of us who find opportunities to begin broaching those subjects, finding words and lingo that may not be burnout or I can't take it anymore, but to find words within your industry or within your spheres that indicate or are descriptive of your experiences. Having the social connections where you can share these and find allies to begin those conversations. Yolanda, you talked about how Uncommon began with dinners, and just having a platform where women can connect. And so if you find those small windows and small little platforms, hopefully that seeds and spawns, greater platforms and a greater voice for you to begin to talk about some things that maybe the social norm may currently stand against.
Yeah, to echo that, I think, what I've seen work in organizations, and like having led teams in Asia is like giving people that opportunity to do it anonymously. So I know at one company I worked at, we at one point had like a little mental well-being box, and people could just write in anonymously, how they were doing, what they were struggling with, and it showed as a company that there was that interest. But it's then that you can take that to like senior leadership teams and show that, okay, these are the voices of your employees, these are some of the challenges that people are facing. What are we as an organization going to do that? Because then once you have a couple of data points, it's quite hard to ignore that, and it gives people that safety of being able to express themselves without also feeling that they might be penalized or viewed in a certain way as well. Great. We've run a little
Yolanda,
bit.
there were a couple of questions, about like the home arrangements and so on.
Oh,
While
yeah.
we may not be able to, tackle those here, just to, give some acknowledgement that I am, looking at those, the Q&A threads and looking at some of those questions, amazing questions that, perhaps, can seed, future dialogues and fireside chats to tackle those, because it is an important arena, the home. And, just how do you balance that in a way that does not contribute to burnout, but in fact, be that refuge and that the solace that the home can, often be designed to be for all of us, right?
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
our next,
real quick one.
Thank you so much for calling that out, Ivan. Our next webinar with Uncommon is actually probably going to address some of these subjects. It's about dual ambition careers. And so we're just started getting that off the ground, but I think that this will come up definitely in that webinar, and appreciate. Yeah, these are very, very pertinent questions. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We've run a little bit over time. Thank you so much to our wonderful speakers, Jessica and Ivan. I, am walking away with just such a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for coming and speaking so honestly and openly with all of our participants. Thank you so much to my wonderful Uncommon team who made this webinar happen as well. They're behind the scenes, making it all come to life, getting it in front of all of you. So a big shout out to them as well. And last but not least, thank you to all of you for coming to this webinar, for carving out a little bit of a slice of your day. That alone is, a really wonderful step in the right direction of taking time for yourself. So thank you so much to everyone. And lastly, to talk a little bit about Uncommon, we've touched a little bit on what we're doing. We're building really a new type of network. It's not about this sort of hustle or die culture. We really want people to get ahead and define, what Jessica said, define what that means for themselves, and find and do so together with the community. If you want the opportunity to connect with a community of like-minded female leaders, we've opened our waitlist for membership, and you can mention the webinar if you do sign up. And if you wish to learn more, please be sure to have a click in the chat box. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.